So hi everyone, in this video we'll be discussing how to best prepare for the chemistry questions in the component of the GAMSAT exam for 2023. So I'll be using a combination of personal experience as well as expert advice from GradReady and our tutors. So if you would like to learn more about what to expect from GAMSAT Chemistry and how to prepare for it, some study tips and some free resources, then stick around. So often when preparing for Section 3, most people find chemistry and physics the hardest, but there's often debate about which one is the harder one. So while on one hand, physics is generally a lot more unfamiliar to the typical student, but chemistry does make up a larger portion of Section 3, and the concepts and ideas that are covered can be a bit more difficult to visualise and tricky to work through. GAMSAT Chemistry is very much about the application of certain theories and ideas to specific problems, and broadly speaking, requires a smaller knowledge base than the biology component of Section 3 of the exam. In addition, chemistry requires a certain level of mathematics, which is similar to physics, and this is needed to use the information provided. So this may take the form of equations or making large approximations. So this video will help you to understand why chemistry is important for the GAMSAT exam and in the medical profession itself. But most importantly, this video will provide you with tips and advice to help maximise your efficiency when studying for the GAMSAT chemistry. So first, let's discuss why chemistry is actually included in the GAMSAT exam. So what is chemistry and why is it included? Well, here's the definition of what chemistry is for the GAMSAT. So chemistry is a scientific study of the properties and behaviour of matter, and it covers the elements that make up the matter to the compounds composed of atoms, molecules and ions, their composition, their structure, their properties and behaviour, and the changes they undergo during a reaction with other substances. It is essential in the study of medicine, as chemistry underpins many of our physiological systems and functions, as well as extending to disciplines such as pharmacology and toxicology. Furthermore, chemistry is inextricably linked and entwined with biology, and as such is helpful to combine the study of these two disciplines together. Building a solid foundation of chemistry is not only important for the GAMSAT exam, but for the medical profession and medical school as well. So reasoning in the biological and chemical sciences is something that medical professionals and medical students do day to day. It requires a solid foundation of chemistry knowledge and then an ability to analyse how different compounds and molecules may interact with one another. So GAMSAT chemistry is designed to test these sort of skills that will be your bread and butter as future medical professionals. Chemistry also makes up a fairly large chunk of Section 3 of the GAMSAT exam, and the general rule is that about 40% of the Section 3 MCQs are chemistry focused. So when you consider that many medical schools place more weight on Section 3 of the GAMSAT in calculating your overall GAMSAT score, the importance of chemistry in study and scoring well becomes more evident. If you would like more information about the GAMSAT exam in general, you can head to our website and check out the guide, What is the GAMSAT exam? And this is a useful starting point. So now that you have an idea why chemistry is included, what sort of things can you expect from it in the GAMSAT exam? So although physics content of Section 3 is often considered the most challenging, the level of assumed knowledge for chemistry is actually higher than physics. So this means that ACER can assess complex chemical concepts and combine these with concepts from physics and biology. So combining disciplines makes it less likely that the content of a unit will be familiar to students and familiar to you. So having a confident grasp on chemistry puts you in a strong position to tackle these combined units, which makes up most of the exam. Chemistry in particular can seem particularly daunting in a visual sense, because GAMSAT chemistry questions often present students with complex arrangements of large molecules or reaction pathways with lots of steps. The visual layout of long skeleton structures of chemicals, as well as the jumbles of letters and numbers, can, understandably, be confronting, causing you to forget the basic chemical principles that actually do still apply. Remember that the chemical structures may be new and may have really long names with lots of numbers and lots of hyphens, but the underlying rules of chemistry still apply. So as promised, we will now outline some of our tips, personal and also advised by GradReady, for how to best prepare for the chemistry in the GAMSAT exam. So stick around to hear us elaborate on a study technique as well. So our chemistry preparation tips has 5 steps to it. So the first is to build up foundational knowledge. The second is to begin knowledge application with MCQs. The third is to create an MCQ strategy. The fourth is to track areas that you're still struggling with. And the fifth is to complete MCQs under exam conditions, for example, under time pressure. So these 5 preparation tips are essentially a roadmap to preparing for Section 3 in the GAMSAT exam in general, but we can tailor our approach to specifically focus on GAMSAT Chemistry. So the chemistry component of the GAMSAT exam is different in that it's much more focused on the application of concepts. So this is advantageous to students as it means that you can simply learn some basic principles and then refine how you apply them to answer questions. So what are the chemistry topics that you need to build knowledge of? Well, here at GradReady, we've composed a list of chemistry topics that we regularly see in the GAMSAT exam. So I'll briefly run through them now, but remember, when you're working through these topics, you only want to know the principles that underpin them. So here is the list of topics. So we've got atoms, we've got electrons, chemical bonds, gases, thermodynamics, acids and bases, electrochemistry, biochemistry, etc. So these are the 12 topics that commonly occur in the GAMSAT exam. If you would like to see how these concepts are actually used and applied in GAMSAT questions for chemistry, which is super important, you can visit our website to access free GAMSAT practice questions and materials. So that will be super helpful for your studying process. So now we know the topics, we're going to move on and discuss in more detail the best way to study for GAMSAT chemistry. So you can use the list that I just discussed to give you a starting point for your study, as your approach heavily depends on your level of background knowledge in chemistry. So I'm now going to discuss a good approach to studying chemistry in Section 3 that has been derived from personal experience and also the experience of other expert tutors at GradReady. This approach is for all students, but particularly those from a non-science background. So this studying approach for chemistry can be split into 5 separate areas. So the first area is to make sure that you review the fundamental topics. The second area is to assess your strengths and weaknesses. The third is to plan your study. The fourth is to jump into some practice MCQs to apply your knowledge. And the fifth is to put yourself under time pressure. I will now explain each of these 5 points in more detail. So step 1 is to review the fundamental topics. So what does this actually mean? Well, let's take an example of doing a puzzle. So understanding fundamental topics is the same as having a puzzle with some of the pieces already put together for you. You just have to figure out how the new pieces fit in. This is much more efficient than starting a puzzle completely from scratch. Your learning does not need to include memorizing facts and information. Rather, you need to try and appreciate the broader processes that underpin each concept and consider the consequences of changes and manipulations to these processes. So familiarity with scientific vocabulary will also allow you to navigate ideas that are complex more quickly. It is best to focus on active learning rather than passive learning and engaging with the content. So this usually involves comparing concepts, answering questions, and manipulating the content rather than just purely writing out paragraphs and trying to memorize details and facts. As you study for GAMSAT chemistry, aim to continuously build on your level of knowledge by relating new concepts back to what you already know. This will make it easier to learn the new concept, but also consolidate the old concepts at the same time. Okay, moving on to step 2, which is to assess your strengths and weaknesses. So obviously, we think this is an obvious thing to do. And from personal experience and working with students, I would say this is probably the most common step that the students don't consider or don't implement, despite how obvious that it sounds. It is not implemented effectively. This is because it's very easy to keep focusing on the content you already know. This gives you a little dopamine hit from the satisfaction of getting everything right the more you do it. But it's really important to spend most of your time developing an understanding of concepts that you find the most difficult and then revisiting familiar concepts less often. You can use websites such as Khan Academy, which provides written and video summaries on topics to learn which you feel the most and least confident with. It may be a good idea to actually rank the topics, for example, using a traffic light system based on how confident you feel. So you could highlight things in green that you're really confident with, highlight things in orange that need revision or review, and then highlighting things in red which are weak. And then this will give you an idea of what you should be visiting the most and what you should be maybe visiting just once a week. It is really still important to do this step, even if you have a strong background in chemistry, so that you know where your strengths and weaknesses lie. And this means that you're not going to be wasting time going over things that you already know when you are then putting away the harder things to the side and giving yourself less practice. So step 3 is to actually write a study plan and plan your study out. So you can use the rankings from step 2 to help you plan this study. So you should devote more time to working through the harder chemistry topics first, like I've said, but then you can help to give yourself a break by looking over the easier topics from time to time, so then you don't get rusty on those as well. Work out which resources are the most effective for you and your studying style, because everybody is different, and the amount of time that you spend building your foundational knowledge before launching into practice questions will also vary depending on your science background. But don't feel like you need to have everything covered before you start doing section 3 questions. Because remember, it is about the application of this knowledge, not just having to memorize everything. So a more time-effective method is to develop a study timetable that lets you revise concepts and then test yourself with practice questions, and do that in a cyclical manner. So step 4 is to now jump into those practice MCQs. So once you've established some foundational knowledge in all areas, it's time to start applying that knowledge. Because again, remember, it's one of the focuses of the GAMSAT and not just memorizing facts by rote learning. So for this reason, it's really worthwhile spending as much time as you can going through practice multiple choice questions. So do as many as you can do as many as you can get your hands on to help familiarize yourself with the style of questions. And this again will help you identify your weak areas rather than just going through content. So in the GAMSAT, chemistry involves a lot of patterns and rules that do require practice in order for you to answer questions confidently and efficiently. Because remember that time is a scarce resource in the GAMSAT exam. So when you come across a concept that you don't understand from going through practice MCQs, remember to go back to your study resources and look it up. So tracking these areas that you're a little unsure of or you're repeatedly getting wrong in the multiple choice questions is an effective way to make sure you're going to tackle these issues that you're having. Make sure that you simulate test conditions as much as possible, including completing full practice exams towards the end of your study. And the last step relates to this point, so put yourself under time pressure. Ideally, you want to complete as many full practice exams under time conditions as you possibly can. This simulates not only the time pressure, but also the fact that the real GAMSAT exams rapidly shift between biology, chemistry, and physics, as well as between different questioning styles. Adapting your thinking style to tackle these different types of questions require you to rapidly shift gears, which takes practice and takes a time to develop. But remember, your aim is to get in as many practice MCQs as possible. You can make a start with these MCQs by signing up to our free trial on our website, which includes 50 free MCQs, as well as heaps of other free resources to get you started. Okay, so we're approaching the end of the video now, so I'll wrap up with a few more key points, some chemistry study tips, and also some advice for the exam day. So first, let's delve into some chemistry study tips. So as a general rule, you will likely not need to know more detail than what is listed in the chapter summaries of an average undergraduate chemistry textbook. So for the next part of this video, I'm going to explain the kind of things that you need to know for each topic that I showed you earlier before in the video. So we'll start with the atoms. With the atoms, you just need to make sure that you understand the features / the structure of the atoms and how these change across the periodic table. For stoichiometry, you need to make sure that you know how to balance chemical equations, because this is a skill that is frequently assessed in the GAMSAT exam. So for electronegativity and bond polarity, like equations, this concept crops up throughout the GAMSAT exam, as it is relevant not just to chemistry, but to biology and physics more broadly. So this is an example of a topic that can assess a student's ability to make inferences using inductive reasoning. So, for example, students may be asked to predict or compare how various molecules will behave based on the principles of electronegativity and polarity. Moving on to electrons and chemical bonds. So, to break this topic down into the various areas that GAMSAT usually focuses on, we can break it down into metallic, covalent, ionic, and hydrogen bonding. Once you're confident with these types of bonds and how they're represented, you can delve deeper into sigma and pi bonds. Moving on to gases, you need to know the essential equations like PV equals nRT and be comfortable manipulating them. You should understand the individual parameters of the equation and how they influence the behavior of gases. For thermodynamics and kinetics, enthalpy, entropy, and Gibbs free energy can seem like daunting concepts, but it's important to understand them so that you can manipulate the key equations. Reaction rates, including rate-limiting steps and different order reactions, so zero order, first order, etc., may also feature in chemistry and biology questions. So next is acids and bases. So with acids and bases, you should be able to define what makes an acid and what makes a base, and also be comfortable drawing connections between this topic, the periodic table, and electronegativity. For electrochemistry, you need to make sure that you're comfortable constructing reduction and oxidation half equations. For organic reactions, you need to have a firm grasp on nomenclature and skeleton structures of carbon compounds. You should also understand how the functional groups of a molecule affect its physical properties as well as its polarity and electronegativity. So for stereochemistry and projections, this includes 3D visualizations, which can be tricky under exam pressure, especially when taking an online exam. So practicing drawing out different molecular conformations is key. Make sure that you understand concepts like chirality, which is often paired with topics like biochemistry. Speaking of biochemistry, that is the next topic. So for this topic, you need to know synthesis pathways of protein, fat, and carbohydrates, as well as the citric acid cycle, as these are prime areas for overlap between the disciplines of biology and chemistry. And finally, for spectroscopies, spectrometries, and laboratory techniques, you need to know all of these three things. This is because data interpretation is a common theme across the GAMSAT exam, so you should be familiar with the common techniques used to collect data in the field of chemistry. So again, these questions require interpretation of unfamiliar data in a familiar context. So for example, you may be presented with the results from something like a chromatography, which is a familiar context, which you then need to draw conclusions and compare unknown substances, which is the unfamiliar data. So remember that Section 3 of the GAMSAT is designed to examine your reasoning and problem-solving skills rather than your recall of specific content. It is critical to develop an ability to integrate new information into an existing framework of knowledge. A key skill that you will need is to be able to break down long, confusing questions, diagrams, and graphs into relevant chunks of information. You will then need to connect these fundamental pieces of information in a meaningful way to arrive at a logical answer. So finally, let's discuss our last topic, which is exam day. So thank you for staying around to the end of this video, and I hope you find this last section really helpful. So my first piece of advice for anyone, for any exam, is to breathe. The body's physiological response to stress prevents us from thinking clearly and can quickly spiral into panic mode. Simple breathing exercises before you start the exam can quieten your nerves and let you channel your adrenaline into solving problems in front of you instead of creating an adrenaline-induced brain fog. The second tip is to get back to basics. So if you get stuck on a question or unit, take a moment, return to the basics that you know. So whether that be the facts of the unit or the basic scientific principles that the unit is assessing. For example, return to something as simple as, I know that oxidation means electrons are lost, and then continue on your reasoning from there. The third point is not to jump to conclusions. Make sure your thinking process is clear and systematic. This is because chemistry often involves maths, and you need to be able to return to your working and reassess your steps if your answer doesn't match any of the options. The fourth point is cutting losses. So section 3 involves a large number of questions and usually way too many to get through in the time limit. Practice as best you can and attempt all of the questions, but in the exam, remember that sometimes you'll need to cut your losses. If you're really struggling with a question or you really can't interpret a graph, it'll probably be more in your favour to move on so that you have more time to give the rest of the questions a go. In saying this, my final point is to never leave a question blank. If you do have to move on from a question, take your best guess and select an answer then and there. Don't leave the answer blank in hope of coming back to it because you probably won't have time. You can always mark it down for review on the spare paper you have in case you do have time to return to it. Remember, you're not penalised for incorrect answers. Finally, I thought I would include a little graphic for some other great free online GAMSAT Chemistry resources from Khan Academy and also some YouTube accounts. So remember, you can also access our GAMSAT free trial, which includes an in-depth day-by-day study guide for different areas of the GAMSAT exam and also free MCQs. So once you get your head around the breakdown of topics in chemistry and the essential equations, you can start practicing the application of these rules, and then you will have a solid foundation from which to jump into abstract or unfamiliar situations. The key for successful studying for the GAMSAT, especially in chemistry, is to plan out your schedule so you can maximise the time you can spend practicing and reviewing chemistry practice questions. Once you have your head around the basic concepts and equations, you need to put them into practice. So I hope you have found this helpful, and please don't forget that here at GradReady, we will take the utmost pleasure in helping you achieve your medical school goals. I hope you found this helpful, and don't forget that here at GradReady, we will take the utmost pleasure in helping you achieve your medical school goals. Please feel free to comment, like, and subscribe on this video, and we'll also put a link in the description box which will lead you to our blog page about this topic if you want to learn more. Good luck with your studies and for the GAMSAT exam, and thanks for watching.